Okay, so again, we're trying to figure out how we can authenticate against the Domo APIs. And like I said, we're going to send a post request to this authentication API with this body. Let's jump over to Visual Studio Code and let's get to it. Let me blow away some of the stuff you're not supposed to see yet. All right. I have here a basic index.js file. And where we're going to start is I'm going to introduce you to the .env library. The .env library is a tool that allows you to create environmental variables. And as part of that, it's a tool that people use to store usernames and passwords. Basically, I'll generate a .env file. It's got my username. It's got my password, which I will change as soon as this tutorial series is done. But I don't want to post my code onto the internet, into GitHub or anywhere else with my true username and password. So what developers have done is they've created this .env library that allows you to have a file where you store this configuration stuff, but it never makes it into GitHub. Again, just Google .env if you haven't heard of this. Okay. Once I run .env config, it gives me the ability to access process.env. And from process.env, I can destructure these variables. And again, those are created and defined in my .env file. So again, right now it says my Domo instance is northshore.io.partner. If I go into my index and I'm creating a function called main, inside of main, I'm going to console.log Domo instance. And it says, oh yeah, I can access this variable. Cool. But that's not what we want. What we want is we want to authenticate against Domo's authentication API and get a session token. So I'm going to create a function called Auth. It's going to do some stuff, and it's going to return something called session token. And then inside of main, I'm going to call Auth. And for authentication, I need to pass in these variables. Those are the pieces of information I need to authenticate. It's going to give me a session token, and then I'm going to console.log session token. I need to tell my authentication function that it's going to receive these variables. Okay. All right. Now, I don't quite have a session token just yet, so what I can do is I can yeah, we'll do this. I can construct my authentication URL, which takes in my Domo instance, northshore.io.partner.domo.com, API, content, v2 authentication. Okay, what do I have to send? I need to send that the method that I'm authenticating with is called password, and I need to send in the body my email address and my password. Remember, these variables are coming in from that .env file. Okay, for right now, I'm going to comment out the rest of this, and let's just return auth so that you can see what it looks like. Okay, so again, this information is stored in my .env. Never put your never put your password on the internet. Make sure to change that if you do. Okay, cool. That's the body. Now, what I want to do is I need to fetch. I need to send a request to this URL. The method that I'm going to send is called post, and the body is going to have this authentication body. I'm wrapping body in JSON.stringify. Sorry, I'm wrapping the auth object in JSON.stringify, which will turn it into a proper, what does JSON stand for? Not JavaScript object notation. Whatever it stands for, it's got to be wrapped with the quotes and the commas and the colons in the right places. Maybe it is JavaScript object notation. Oh, that's embarrassing. Moving on rapidly, okay? My body needs to be in JSON format. Okay, so this time I'm going to return a response. What happens when I send my fetch request? Well, actually, nothing's going to happen. I think this is going to error out. It's going to error out for a couple of reasons. One, it says, I don't know what await means. Okay, so now we need to talk about async await. An asynchronous action is something that doesn't happen instantaneously. If I send a query to my API or to Domo's API, I don't know how long it's going to take Domo to get an answer. It could take 0 seconds, it could take 10 seconds. So I need to await. I need to wait till this comes back to me before I can go on to the next step. And because I need to do stuff, because I need to wait, we introduce what's called an asynchronous function. And so we can use async to identify that's an asynchronous function. And tell it to await, da-da-da. Now, in my main function, because the auth function is asynchronous, I need to say, hey, main, you've got some asynchronous code in here. You need to await a response from the authentication function before you print session token. Otherwise, we don't get what we want. All right, so now let's try running this. By the way, async await, you'll also see people do .then strings. This is all Googleable stuff. It does take a little bit to wrap your brain around, but I'm going to try to be clear when I'm using asynchronous functions or not. Okay. I tried running my code. It says fetch is not defined. Fetch is a library that will send a curl request or send a request. So I have to import fetch from the node fetch library. Okay, and this time I get a response. Now, this isn't quite what I wanted. I want to see my session token. In order to do that, just if you read the fetch documentation, it will tell you that you need to run the .json method over the response. So before I can finish, I need to say const data is equal to response and then run the JSON method over it. Now that JSON method is going to take this buffer and translate it into whatever my API sent me. And this is also an asynchronous function, so I need to await the response. And hey, now I've got a session token. Now, my goal for my authentication token is to just send back the session token. I don't want to have to parse out session token from the response. So instead of sending the full data, I'm going to send back .session token, just that piece. But guys, what happens if I misspell my password or something's wrong? It would break if I said, hey, there's a session token, but there really wasn't one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build in some logic. I'm going to say if success is true. So I basically can say if data.success, then return the session token. Else, I'm going to console.log error. But you know what? I like to have a little bit of feedback in some of these functions. So I'm going to say welcome. Ooh, I'm going to use a template string. So single tilde. Welcome data.user ID. Let's just leave that at that. That'll be enough. Oops, data.user ID. So hey, welcome user ID. There's my session token. I don't want to print this anymore, so I'm going to comment that out for now. Cool. Now it would be nice to just see my name, because we all like to see our own name. So how can I get my name? It's not included. The name is not included in the response from authentication. I have to go to my API and say, hey, is there a user profile API that will allow me to find the user's name? And again, how would you do that if you didn't have me running you through this tutorial? You would go someplace where you can see the username, maybe click on, let me clear. Okay, maybe click on my face and click on my profile here. And my user ID is this. And so I can say, hey, if I sent a GET request to, nope, not that. That's not what I want. Here, if I send a GET request to users, profiles, what's my response? My response includes my username and stuff. Okay, cool. So if I just copy this guy and pop over into Postman, do I need to be authenticated? Ooh, I cheated. I passed in my authentication. Do I need to be authenticated? Yes, I do. It says I need full authentication. So I need that session token again. And then I'll get a response. Okay, so how can I do that in my code? In my authentication function, here I've got my data, and data.sessionToken is my session token. So can I send another fetch request? So let's see. Let's call this user response is equal to await fetch. I need to construct my URL. My my user URL is equal to what is this? $, Domo instance. https:// Domo instance.domo.con, Here, I'm going to pass in data.userid, lowercase d, and give me the profile. Cool. That's my URL. So user URL. And my method is going to be a get request. Is it get? It's get. And my content type, well, there is no content, so I think I can just do this. I do need my, well, let's see what happens. Let's try to console log my user response. It's going to say Domo instance, you need to learn how to spell. Let's try that again. So now this is going to fail and tell me, oh, well, it got a response. It's unauthorized. Okay. So I need to add X Domo authentication and pass in my session token, which is data.sessionToken. This is a header, right? So I need to wrap this in headers, oops, why aren't you happy? Oh, because I need single ticks here. Okay, now let's try to see what I get. My user response, right? Because I've included authentication. It says status is okay. Na 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 na. But I need to do wrap my fetch request in that .json. So const user data equals response.json. Now notice here it says promise pending. I forgot that response.json is a promise. So I need to await the response, the user response rather. Okay. Now why do I have this extra HTTPS in there? You don't belong. Okay. Cool. We've got all the pieces. Okay. We've now sent a fully authenticated API request. Here we said, I want to hit user profiles. Initially it said, oh, you're not authenticated. And so I said, okay, that's fine. In my headers, I'm going to pass this X Domo authentication and I'll pass my session token. And then it says, okay, maybe. I needed to wrap my user response in that .json before I get usable data. That's the same as here where we pass XDOMO authentication, I copy paste this value. That's the difference between seeing a result versus not seeing a result. Okay. All right. So now that I have user data, I can say, hey, welcome user data.display name. And now what do we get? Welcome Jay Wilson. User ID. Okay. What have we done? We've done authentication. Hooray. Let's take this, let's just wrap up this last little thing. When we write functions, when we write little mini programs, generally we're going to try not to have it all in one script. I would, instead of having this all in index.js, I'm going to take this authentication script here, all of that. I'm going to cut it, function, and I'm going to make a new file called auth2.js. I'm going to paste my content there. Cool. Now, if I just try to run index2.js, it gives me an error. It says auth is not defined. Oh, that's because I moved it into a new file. So now I'm going to say import auth from auth2.js. And this isn't going to work either. It's going to say, hey, there's no export named default. In auth2.js, I could have 1, 2, or 50 functions that I'm trying to reference in other files. So I'm going to tell it, hey, export my function called auth. And then over here on my import, because I could have many functions that I'm referencing, I'm going to wrap this in square brackets and say, hey, I want you explicitly to import auth. And you got to remember to save it over here. All right. And now it says fetch is not defined. Oh, for goodness sakes. It's saying that because in index2.js, I've done my import statement. But when I run auth under auth2.js, it doesn't know about this import shenanigans. So I need to move this code into that JavaScript file. Now when I run it, it will work as expected. we did a ton. We queried the APIs and we did a little bit of housekeeping around setting up our JavaScript application. Some of the things we looked at is we looked at using the .env file and the .env library for configuring username and password, so I don't have to store it in GitHub. For Auth, in terms of our actual code, we compartmentalize. I have my main code, which is going to be like every time I run this program, maybe I have some user-defined variables or stuff, like I want to handle that there. And then this auth2.js file is just how do I handle authentication? And I'm passing in variables into this code that I can reference. What's powerful about compartmentalizing your code is I could just take this document, email it to you, and you can make it work without, well, I mean, obviously I have to pass in the right parameters, but it will just work for you. And so we're decoupling our code. We're making it all kind of stand alone. All right, guys, that was a lot. My name's Jay Wilson. I'm a freelance consultant through my company, Honest Reporting. We're going to keep on iterating on this tutorial, so I hope you join me for the next one. Catch you soon.